So yesterday we got a preview of what the first family was like in paradise. This was before Cain slew Abel. Now we're at Cain, the children of God, and the giants. I saw that Cain conceived on the Mount of Olives the design to murder Abel. After the deed, he wandered about the same spot, frightened and distracted, planting trees and tearing them up again. Then I saw a majestic figure in the form of a man, refulgent with light, appear to him. Cain, he said, where is thy brother Abel? Cain did not at first see the figure, but when he did, he turned and answered, I know not. He has not been given in charge to me. But when God replied that Abel's blood cried to him from the earth, Cain grew more troubled. And I saw that he disputed long with God. God told him that he should be cursed upon the earth, that it should bring forth no fruit for him, and that he should forthwith flee from the land in which he then dwelt. Cain responded that everywhere his fellow men would seek to kill him. There were already many people upon the earth. Cain was very old and had children. Abel also left children, and there were other brothers and sisters, the children of Adam. But God replied that it would not be so, that whoever should kill Cain should himself be punished sevenfold, and he placed a sign upon him that no one should slay him. Cain's posterity gradually became colored. Ham's children also were browner than most of Shem. They who were distinguished by a particular mark engendered children of the same stamp, and as corruption increased, the mark also increased, until at last it covered the whole body, and people became darker and darker. But yet in the beginning there were no people perfectly black. They became so only by degrees. God pointed out to Cain a region to which he should flee. And because Cain said, Then wilt thou let me starve? The earth was for him accursed. God answered, No, that he should eat the flesh of animals. He told him likewise that a nation would arise from him, and that good also would come from him. Before this, men ate no flesh. Cain went forth and built the city, which he named after his son Enoch. Abel was slain in the valley of Jehoshaphat, opposite of Mount Calvary. Many murders and evil deeds took place there at a subsequent period. Cain slew Abel with a kind of club that he used to break soft stones and earth when planting in the fields. The club must have been of hard stone, for it was shaped like a pickaxe with a handle of wood. We must not picture to ourselves the earth before the deluge as it is now. Palestine was by no means so broken up in valleys and ravines. Plains were far more extensive, and single mountains less lofty. The Mount of Olives was at the time only a gentle rising. The crib cave of Bethlehem was, as later, a wild cavern, but the surroundings were different. The people of those early times were larger, though not out of proportion. We would regard them with astonishment, but not with fright, for they were far more beautiful in form than people of a later period. Among the old marble statues that I see in many places lying in subterranean caves may be found similar figures. Cain led his children and grandchildren to the region pointed out to him. and there they separated. Of Cain himself, I have never seen anything more that was sinful. His punishment appeared to consist in hard but fruitless labor. Nothing in which he was personally engaged succeeded. I saw that he was mocked and reviled by his children and grandchildren, treated badly in every way, and yet they followed him as their leader. Though as one accursed, I saw that Cain was severely punished, but not damned. One of Cain's descendants was Tubal-Cain, the originator of numerous arts and the father of the giants. I have frequently seen that when the angels fell, a certain number had a moment of repentance and did not in consequence fall as low as the others. Later on, these fallen spirits took up their abode on a high, desolate, and wholly inaccessible mountain, whose site at the time of the deluge became a sea, the Black Sea, I think. They were permitted to exercise their evil influence upon men in proportion as the latter strayed further from God. After the deluge, they disappeared from that region and were confined to the air. They will not be cast into hell before the last day. I saw Cain's descendants becoming more and more godless and sensual. They settled further and further up the mountain ridge, where were the fallen spirits. The spirits took possession of many of the women, ruled them completely, and taught them all sorts of seductive arts. Their children were very large. They possessed a quickness and aptitude for everything, and they gave themselves up entirely to the wicked spirits as their instruments. And so arose on this mountain and spread far around a wicked race, which by violence and seduction sought to entangle Seth's posterity likewise in their own corrupt ways. Then God declared to Noah his intention to send the deluge. During the building of the ark, Noah had to suffer terribly from these people. I've seen many things connected with the race of giants. They could with ease carry enormous stones high up the mountains. They could accomplish the most stupendous feats. They could walk straight up trees and walls, just as I have seen others possessed by the devil doing. They could effect the most wonderful things. They could do whatever they wished. But all was pure jugglery and delusion due to the agency of the demon. It is for that reason that I have such horror of every species of jugglery and fortune-telling. These people could form all kinds of images out of stone and metal, but of the knowledge of God they no longer had a trace. They sought their gods in the creatures around them. I've seen them scratch up a stone, form it into an extravagant image, and then adore it. They worshipped also a frightful animal and all kinds of ignoble things. They knew all things. They could see all things. They were skilled in preparing of poisons. They practiced sorcery and every species of wickedness. The women invented music. I saw them going around among the better tribes trying to seduce them to their own abominations. They had no dwelling houses, no cities, but they raised massive towers of shining stone. Under those towers were little structures leading into great caverns, wherein they carried on their horrible wickedness. From the roofs of these structures the surrounding country could be seen, and by mounting up into the towers and looking through tubes, one could see far into the distance. It was not like looking through tubes made to bring distant objects into view. The power of the tubes to which I here allude was affected by satanic agency. They that looked through them could see where the other tribes were settled. Then they marched against them, overcame them, and lawlessly carried all before them. That same spirit of lawlessness they exercised everywhere. I saw them sacrificing children by burying them alive in the earth. God overthrew that mountain at the time of the deluge. Enoch, Noah's ancestor, not to be confused with Cain's son, opposed that wicked race by his teachings. He wrote much. Enoch was a very good man and one very grateful to God. In many parts of the open fields, he raised altars of stones, and there fruits of the earth flourished. He gave thanks to God and offered sacrifice to him. Chiefly in his family was religion preserved and handed down to Noah. Enoch was taken up to paradise. There he waits at the entrance gate, whence with another, Elijah, he will come again before the last day. Ham's descendants likewise had similar relations with the evil spirits after the deluge. And from such connections sprung so many demoniacs and necromancers, so many mighty ones in the world, so many great, wild, daring men. Semiramis herself was the offspring of demoniacs. Consequently, she was apt at everything save the working out of her salvation. Later on, there arose another people, esteemed as gods by the pagans. The women that first allowed themselves to be ruled by evil spirits were fully conscious of the fact, though others were ignorant of it. These women had it, the principle of possession, in them, like flesh and blood, like original sin. End of reading. So, I thought, I'm only going to have a few notes, and I started to write those notes down, and no, I have a page full, so buckle up. First note, Cain had a son named Enoch, but there's a different Enoch that came from the line of Seth. Yeah, if you read Genesis 5, you see that. I can look that up quickly here. I just want to... And they call them Enoch, I think. Jeez. Okay, yeah, Seth. After Seth lived, he begot Enos. Enos lived 90 years, begot Canaan. Canaan lived 70 years, begot Malaleel. And I'll get into that. Actually, I heard this from a Protestant, actually. They took the first 12 names, I think, the line of Noah, and they made a phrase out of it. Like, I can't remember the phrase, but it was the promise of the redemption, which I found cute, but yeah. And they call him Henoch in the Douay rhymes, Henoch rather than just Enoch. But yeah, he's from the line of Seth, whereas Cain had a son named Enoch. And you see them both in Genesis. Genesis 4 is the Enoch first mentioned, and Genesis 5 is the good, the righteous Enoch. So, next, note that, okay, Cain himself wasn't condemned. And this is something that surprised me a little bit, but in the end, no. The way she described his life, like he was a shame. Like he constantly lived as an object of ridicule to even his own family. And it was kind of like hell on earth. And that's the reason I think he wasn't condemned, because he lived through, like he committed a sin, but then lived through the punishment of that sin on earth as sort of his penance. Whereas a lot of people do evil and they die evil men, but then they've never done the penance, so they get cast into hell. So it kind of reminds me of that. I don't know how many Star Wars fans here there are, but in the third movie where the woman is like, there's good in him. That's what it reminds me of. There was something to redeem in Cain. He killed his brother, but he tried, kind of thing. Another thing, next note, purgatory. There's a lot of people, i.e. Protestants, who don't believe in purgatory, but purgatory, and we can't write too much theology on it, but what we can say, and this is just pure theology, is that we live our lives with an intention. And the intention, we may have the intention of being, of getting to God, walking the path of righteousness, and something takes us off that intention. Yet the intention is still alive. It's just we've been knocked off our perfect course, and now we have to take a longer, more wretched course to get there. Purgatory may just simply be that we were not able to accomplish everything we needed to before we expired, but it's some extra rope that God's giving us to be able to do what we intended to do, because heaven is a hierarchy and there's an intended throne for us. And if heaven is a hierarchy and there's an intended throne for us, we have to merit that throne. And sometimes, well, maybe we don't get there on our own merits, but maybe other people merit it for us, which is why it's important to pray for our dead relatives, especially our parents and our ancestors. So, and this is all purgatory is. It's just that extra bit of rope so that men can be what they intended on becoming, maybe just in a dimmer world where now they have much less agency. But if you pray for someone who a fallen soul that's not fallen completely, well, that's part of their agency, that they're helping you pay penance for your things as much as you're paying penance for them. So yeah, we don't know the whole story behind purgatory, but Catholics at least acknowledge, well, it's just that bit of extra rope. And I might be completely wrong on this. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it's pure theology. It makes sense. Now, eating flesh meat. This is my next note. Eating flesh meat. I made a note about it yesterday that maybe they just hadn't thought of it yet, but she elaborates on it today. She says, well, it was the sons of Cain that started to do it, and because God told them to. Maybe that's part of their penance. But it reminds me of, first of all, there's two notes. One, people complain about, like, say, cows or pigs and lambs being slaughtered, but it's a noble thing for animals to give their lives up. Like, Jesus is called the Lamb, and the Lamb was slaughtered, and his slaughter, the Holocaust of the Lamb, is given for our redemption, right? It's something that feeds us. And then we eat the Holy Host. The Holy Host is, and we've had Eucharistic miracles where the Holy Host turns into flesh that's taken from a distressed heart. They always get the same blood type, something like AB positive or whatever. It's the one that's, I won't get into that. Blood type and plasma are different things. But anyways. So that's the first note. It almost seems like, and we, in our age of Catholicism, we're eating fish. So and it's the Friday thing, right? Fish are things we fish from the ocean because they live near the surface of the ocean. It's like they live at the place of the greatest light. And it's almost like, well, this is our noble behavior, that we offer ourselves up in suffering, in sacrifice, to those things above us that snatch us and eat us. And they make worth out of the things we've lived for. So it's like fish go around eating, filling themselves up, filling their bellies, becoming more meatier, and then we fish them out so that we can make ourselves meatier and survive. And it's almost like, okay, well, in order for us to get into heaven, we also have to swim near the surface where all the light is, make ourselves meteor, that is, fill our cups. And this is a typology that was from the Garabandal, right? Our Lady told Conchita Gonzalez, one of the visionaries, the main one, I would say, that you have to fill up your cup before you bring it to heaven with your sacrifices. And so fish, they fill up their cups and then they offer it as a sacrifice. We men eat them as an unfortunate consequence of our living on this planet, but again, it's an aspect of this current realm we're living in. And we're living in a different realm than the realms of the past. Maybe it's just to remind us, well, we eat fish. We ourselves are fish, that we have to be fished by Peter, by Christ. So, next note, manna and quail. That's what it reminded me of. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they were given manna to eat. And manna was perfectly nutritious, I would say. It gave them everything they needed to get through the wilderness. But they didn't want manna. They wanted quail. It kind of reflects this thing. The sons of Cain want meat. And it's like them telling God, we want quail. In a different way, it's telling God, we want to be sons of Cain, not sons of Abel. All right, well, you're sons of Cain. And this is how it seems to remind me, and this is, sorry, my throat gets bubbled. Reminds me of Christ washing the feet of the disciples. So Christ is washing Peter's feet, and Peter's reluctant on giving him his feet. And I believe this was a towel. In poker, when you're playing poker, you have tells, right? People have body language that suggests what's in their hands. And perhaps Peter's reluctance was a tell, and Judas never had his feet washed at all. That it's like, well, I'm serving you. Although I'm your God, I'm serving you. And although you are above men, you have to serve them. In that kind of way, because you're serving God by serving men. Just like the parable of the sheep and the goats, where when we treat homeless people by feeding them and whatnot, we're doing this for God. And it was a tell for the Israelites to say, we want quail, we want meat, give us meat. And God said, all right, you want meat? I'll give you meat. Because this is what you want to be. You want to be sons of Cain, not sons of Abel. All right, next note. In the Bible, when a person were, oh yes, black and black. When you look up, and you could do word searches for context. Let's say you have the whole Old Testament and New Testament on a Word file or a TXT file. You do a Control F, and you search for certain words. And I confess, I do this with when I look things up in Mystical City. I know it's in there, but I don't know where it's at, so I do word searches. Because I have Mystical City of God all transcribed. I don't have this all transcribed on my system yet, but it's coming. Anyways, I do a word search, and you can look up black or darkened or whatever, and you often see black associated with guilt or shame. And it's almost, this is extremely consistent here. When the darker skinned people of Cain's descendants had the darker skin, they may have been more shame, more in shame, more guilty, because they're the sons of a murderer. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't like the idea that we inherit the sins of our parents. And I confess this. It's one of my guilty pleasures. I watched Jane Austen series, the old BBC ones. Not the old ones, but from the 90s to the 2000s. And in Emma, Mr. Knightley says to Emma, like it or not, we're living in the real world where we pay for the actions of our parents. And that was, 200 years ago. It's still present. We may not like it. Some people want to think, oh, well, I'm baptized, so I get a fresh slate. No, that's not how it works. We still inherit. And I'm mostly French, but I have a little bit of Spanish in me. And Spanish means I got a temper. I got a bad temper. So we do inherit. And this is what they call the exorcist called like a generational haunting or a spirit or a curse. And I call it a haunting. We're haunted by the predilection towards the errors our parents had. It's just the way we are. And the sooner we can get on that, the sooner we can attack it and annihilate it. But we have to identify the problem first. This is why we have saints. They help us solve problems. So, now, a new typology here. And it's not a new typology, but I liken joy to sun and rain to sorrow. And we pray the 3 decades, or the 3 mysteries, the joyful mysteries. It's 15 decades. The joyful mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries, and the glorious mysteries. And it's in that order. Joyful, then sorrowful, then glorious. Joyful is like sun. Now, every plant needs sun. Every plant needs rain. It helps them. If you want a plant to fully mature so that it gives fruit, and I'm not talking about cacti, but, normal stuff. If you want every plant to grow and grow so that it bears fruit, then you need sun and rain. Well, if you live in hot regions that are mostly desert, that are just arid most of the year, then you get darker just because you're living in the sun. It's like you're trying to live a joyful life constantly. And if you live a life seeking after joy constantly, then you get darkened by shame and guilt. We're not supposed to live this way as humans, but most people on this planet do. This is why we have most of our population near the equatorial regions, and most of the people are darkened down there. Whereas the people that live in the more inclement regions, they get whiter and whiter. So where we live in, I live in snowy Canada, well, it's pretty white here. If you're native, we're getting darker, but that's because of uncontrolled immigration, unassimilated immigration. So here it's white because we live in more inclement weather. It's just when you live in half the year under clouds or most of the year under clouds, well, it's almost like a form of penance, and then you get whiter. But and I will say this, do not get offended. If you are darker skinned, it means almost nothing now, because now we are uniformly under this system of technology where we're building the new Babel. We're all in sin. This is the worst era in history of mankind. We are bad, and we're all bad. So it means we have great saints in our time, and they'll come in all colors, I assure you. Next, note. And these are the plentiness of notes I have. Fallen angels. This one is a lot to unpack. Now, she says the sons of God, these ones weren't fallen all the way. They were fallen halfway. Now, when I wrote I wrote a novel where I'd written this like parallel world, and I made this my own hierarchy of angels and devils. Now, it was stupid, but it's kind of the same ideas. They were a hierarchy. And there is a hierarchy of angels and devils for real. Now, I've listened to the many times that Father Malachi Martin appeared on programs, and I did listen to all the Art Bell stuff, which he has to talk about in a more neutral sense. He can't come off as fully Catholic there. So instead, he kind of has to speak as an ambassador, and I get it. He has to play the ambassador. You can't just come on swords a flinging, swords a swinging on those programs, or you don't get invited back. So there is some let up. You have to have the sword. You have to swing the sword. He still has to be Catholic, but he can't just bludgeon everything. So it means that you have to swing it with finesse and grace. Well, on Art Bell, he did so, although some people still complain he wasn't Catholic enough. But he talked about this thing called the middle plateau. And this is what I feel is real, and I'll get into that. And this is pretty dense, but the middle plateau, and we hear of certain quote-unquote prophets. I'm not ready to call them prophets. Edgar Cayce, if you look him up. Edgar is Cayce, who claimed he saw like pixies and sprites and fairies and whatnot. The stuff that you would say typifies the middle plateau. But here Anne Catherine is saying, no, they're all fallen angels. They're all been cast out from heaven, just not all of them were cast all the way down to hell. So they end up in the middle. But in the middle, guess what? They're still evil. They still take you away from God. Just not directly away. It's sort of sideways away from God, but it's away from God. So, and this is the next note. These are always evil, though they're lesser evils, and people call it like Wiccan or white magic and whatnot. I call it gypsy magic, because as she said in her text, and she nails this right on the head, it was the area where the Black Sea is now underwater. And you almost might wonder, okay, what if they took diggers and they dug underneath the Black Sea, or they dug underneath the Persian Gulf, because that's a really shallow sea. It's only like 300 meters in depth, only, but compared to oceans that are kilometers in depth, yeah, it's pretty shallow. And if they took diggers under these things, they'd probably find a lot of archaeology from these giants, especially in the Black Sea. Because, and she said she saw them in subterranean caves, which means there probably is architectural proof if we dig down. They might well be under Egypt as well there. And I have a feeling we may learn more about this in the next 10 or 20 years. So if they actually did this, they would probably find a lot of evidence on giants and their architecture. But we already have evidence of giant architecture on Earth. They're not necessarily around the Black Sea, but Turkey is a country of extreme interest when it comes, because in one of the, I'm sorry I'm speaking so fast and tangenting, but just so dense with information here. There's actually like monster attacks underneath a Turkish lake, and that suggests that there may be like an underworld there. And they call it, the Bible actually calls it the gate to Hades in one of the addresses to the churches of Revelation, which are all in Turkey. Okay, so we're around the Black Sea here, the old Byzantine Empire. The reason I call it gypsy magic is I've talked to a lot of people when I was on chat lines and I talked to people from Ukraine, people from Romania, people from Georgia, people from a couple women from Turkey. And one of those Ukrainian girls, she had emigrated to the US, and she would be able to do things like she'd just be able to approach animals and pick them up like birds, and they wouldn't attack her. There were things like that. They were witchy. And you also get this from Russia near the borders of Georgia and the Ukraine. And you get a lot of women who are quote unquote witchy. This is not for play, this is for real. They actually do possess the germ that allows them to do this, which suggests that they are the germ of these fallen angels that had possessed the women. To be able to perform the gypsy magic, it's in their ancestry, and it's upon them to condemn it. But they don't. They're like, well, I want to use it. It's power. And I know a guy married to one of these women. So to say, oh, well, that's all bogus, it's not bogus, I assure you. But it is dangerous. In fact, it should be condemned altogether. Exorcists will tell you this should be condemned. Next note, people wonder how certain things were built. She provides an answer. But me, I'm wondering, okay. And I'm going to make a quick anecdote before I get into this. Father Malachi Martin said in one of his exorcisms, they were exorcising a young woman. I don't know if she was young. I don't know if she was a model, but she's a young woman. She was petite, not very big. Well, when they were exorcising her, she had four big burly brothers who had to help pin her down. And by the end of the night, it was a session of like 8 hours, and they had to rest and go home. They could not hold this little woman down because of how strong she was. And this is one of the signs of possession, the strength, the super strength they get. So they get really strong, and then, well, and she's describing how they're just walking upright up trees and stuff like that. And carrying these huge boulders that even given their size should be physically impossible. And we see structures in these times that were built by massive bricks. We have no idea how the heck they were put together. Well, now we have an idea. Magic and giants. So it's magic and giants. It seems like a dismissive explanation, but sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. And exorcists would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Because of what exorcists have seen, even though we live in this surreal sub-reality where we don't really understand how demons work, exorcists know, they deal with it. So we have to accept what they tell us. Next point, I wonder if the antediluvian era, that is pre-flood, was a lower G-force environment. That is, G-force of like half of what it is now, 4.0 meters per second square instead of 9.8. Where it would explain these feats a lot better, and it would also explain how men were able to live near 1,000 years. Because life was different. If they're in a different realm, life is different. And she already says, well, the landscape was so different then. But one thing she says, it's that Palestine was a region, that Turkey was a region, that all these places were a region. Turkey, I say Turkey, but the mountain where the Black Sea was. So they were a region. Which means the face of the earth was changed, but it wasn't utterly changed. And when you look at, and this is something I noticed, when you look at South America, how well it fits off on the coast of Africa, I wonder if these were ripped away quickly during the flood, because the tear is too perfect. You look at the lands, there's barely, like, if it was If it was, as the geologists would say, after millions and millions of years to 250 million years or whatever of erosion and stuff like that, their coastlines would not fit so clean together. It had to have been done within a year. But anyways, I'll go on. And these are just, again, speculations like I speculated yesterday. But even then, I wonder if it's a low G-force environment, because even now, and I'll get into another anecdote, there are two actors on Game of Thrones. There was Peter Dinklage and the guy who played the Mountain. I don't remember his name. He's a big, big boy. He's 6'8" and he's pure muscle. He's like 350, 400 pounds of muscle. Peter Dinklage he's a dwarf, so he's small. So they went out to lunch together once, and he said, well, I ordered something, but then this guy ordered something. And he ordered 12 full chickens, which tells you the ridiculous appetite these big people can have. And if you listen to stories about Andre the Giant, worth it, by the way. If you want to listen to anecdotes about a very interesting person, look up Andre the Giant. But just he had surgery done on him, and he gave the anesthesiologist a nightmare because he said it took 12 quarts of vodka just to get a buzz or something like that. And if you're the anesthesiologist, you're like, how much do we give this guy to make sure he's asleep during the surgery so that he doesn't wake up full of pain and raging, right? And that's the kind of stuff you have to think about when you're thinking about giants, okay? If they lived in this current G-force environment, which, by the way, is impossible for dinosaurs to live in, the brontosauruses would not be able to lift their neck. So you do wonder at the G-force environment. And in order for a giant to live in the current G-force environment, they need a ridiculous appetite. It's not viable for them to live in this environment, unless, of course, they were possessed. Well, that could change the equation. So it is. Next. And you wonder if the G-force was uniform on the planet, because it's not currently uniform, but it's maybe more uniform now than it was. For example, in the ocean, you would technically have less of a G-force over the ocean you would have over certain parts of the land. And there's actually a map, like they did a topography of how the G-force affects the different parts of the planet. You can look that map up. It's pretty interesting. So, and it also suggests these things may have been underwater creatures, or they lived in a different realm. So, we don't know this. Next note. Almost done here. Half-fallen angels would be cast down at judgment. So, even given the little rope they were given, turned out they were evil. So, they're still evil. So, there's no such thing as white magic. They're lesser evil, but it's still evil. So both of them are going to take you to condemnation. Avoid them entirely. Do not do Reiki or New Age tarot card readings or anything like that. Scam it, because you're giving demons a doorway into your life. You want to close off all of these doorways. You want to have a nice tight fortress. Otherwise, if you're going to do this stuff, you may as well tear down all your walls. Just go in and ham. Right? Full ham. But don't do it at all. Build your fortress. Make sure every stone is in place so that the demons cannot infiltrate it. We cannot allow them in through any means whatsoever. Last note. Enoch and Elias. Or Elijah. We hear about their coming in Revelation 11, the two witnesses. And they're prophesied to come again. Why? Because they have not died yet. God felt it right to pull them up into a sub-heaven, and she says at the gates, which means he's not allowed in. A sub-area of heaven so that he can bring them back and they can die a martyr's death, but in a different way. And they're going to be the two lampstands, the two prophets that come. And these two lampstands, they come in multiple ways, but in the truest form of that prophecy, they come in that way, where Enoch and Elias will be two great prophets who come and give their lives because they have not yet paid the punishment of Genesis 3. They have not yet died. They need to die. That is the punishment fulfilled. And so they've lived all this time. They're alive even now. They're just somewhere else. They will come back. They will be sent to earth and they will die. And actually, there is a Jewish boy. He's probably like 25 now, but he was 16 at the time. He's probably, yeah, he'd probably be around 25 now. He died. I think it was a surgery, appendicitis or whatever. And he saw like the Gan's Eden, the paradise. And he foresaw the two witnesses coming in his near-death experience. So even he prophesied of their coming, and he's Jewish. Meaning God has a plan for the Jews, for the current Jews, not the ancient Jews. They're different. They're quite a bit different, but I'll get into that. That's a whole video in and of itself. Let's just call them the sons of Cain. So anyways, those two witnesses are meant to come back in the flesh so that they can die. And they may come back within the next 25 years. So pay attention. Anyways, that's the end of the video. If you made it this far, congratulations.